Last quarter of 2025, Sinners blew the barnyard door off the box office. Mission Impossible tried to kill Tom Cruise again. Friendship lampooned the male loneliness epidemic. And Lilo and Stitch face-planted at the finish line. Now, listen, I know the end of the quarter was all the way back at the end of June. But hey, better late than never. Today, we are looking back at the second quarter of 2025 in films. I don't really give ratings, so just for simplicity's sake, all these movies will be sorted into pass, fail, or recommended. So let's just dive into it, huh? Moderate spoilers, by the way, so be warned. First, the fail films.
What a disappointment you are.
The bottom of the barrel is yet another movie where we have to watch the President of the United States who's holed up in a location when, what do you know, it turns out the President is some gun-toting badass. Now you may be thinking I'm referring to John Cena's new star vehicle, but no, I'm actually still recovering from Amazon's earlier attempt with Viola Davis in G20. But isn't it a little strange that there were two of them this year? And both of them from Amazon MGM Studios, and only months apart. I think it's high time we just retire this plotline. Air Force One was already a ripoff of Die Hard, and no one has really done it better. Not Olympus Has Fallen, not White House Down, not Big Game, and certainly not this film. This is a movie that's so dry and mediocre that not even Viola Davis's, natural charisma could keep it from falling into this pit of forgetful direct-to-streaming mediocrity. I didn't even see this that long ago, and my brain's already forgotten it. It had absolutely nothing new to add to this tired formula. Maybe try locking a different kind of profession in a fixed location and making them fight their way out. Just a suggestion. You could do like a dog catcher or, an accountant. But wait. The Accountant 2 was more of a difficult film for me to place. On one hand, I did enjoy it more than the original. The first film was really about as exciting as you'd expect an action thriller with an accountant to really be. Ben Affleck's autistic killer was about as charismatic as a potted plant. Now, I like a ludicrous story as much as the next person, but the world building of this accountant secretly being a hired gun should have been more exciting. The best part was easily the dynamic between the two brothers, and this is where The Accountant 2 is really trying to pivot its focus, rebranding itself as a buddy action comedy. Two bickering brothers who have to put aside their differences and come together. It's not exactly the most original concept, but it plays up Affleck and Bernthal's natural chemistry. There is fun to be found, even if you may get a little tonal whiplash from the first film. I still found that I would take this over, just feeling like a dime store Jason Bourne. I didn't hate it, but it really didn't do anything to set itself apart from the many buddy action comedies. It is a fairly forgettable affair, even if it's a harmless one. Now, harmless, that's a word I would not use for director Gareth Edwards' next film, Havoc. Now, when I heard Edwards had a new action movie up his sleeve, I was pretty excited for it. I'm a big fan of his two Raid films. They're tense, hard-hitting, and it makes use of a very simple concept of just trying to escape in an apartment complex. It pairs killer shoot-'em-up action with some of the most hard-hitting martial arts fisticuffs we've seen in years. So imagine my disappointment when Havoc ends up feeling like it's just this series of gunfights wrapped around a half-baked noir. Half the film looks like they ate their budget up lighting it with neon lights, while most of the gun-blazing action tries, unsuccessfully I might add, to make up for its lack of interesting choreography with just gratuitous violence. The film is predictably at its best when the protagonist drops his weapon and starts punching people in the face. At least then you see a spark of the action genius from the Raid. If only the smallest, just tiniest of sparks. This was a massive disappointment because it's from a director whose work I quite enjoyed. I expected better. Instead, what I got was another film destined to be lost in the direct-to-streaming garbage bin. But hopefully I'm not giving you too much whiplash by, pivoting here to the more family-friendly end of things. We got to see Disney trying their hand at yet another live-action remake. For most of the runtime, Lilo and Stitch honestly is maybe one of their least offensive attempts. It's not drowned in CGI, it's fairly grounded outside the opening sequence and, of course, having a tiny blue alien. The story is grounded in human relationships, and it's about as cozy and cute as ever. But like I said at the beginning, they completely fumble it at the finish line. Director Dean Fleischer Camp abandons themes set up in both the original and this film to the detriment and demise of this version. It's entirely tone-deaf to the very concept of thematic symmetry, as it butchers a simple story about families sticking together to instead chase the modern notion of self-actualization. And there's a lot of films where they can make that theme work, but in trying to inject it into Lilo and Stitch, they end up creating one of the most cynical endings I've ever seen. So while it started out as one of Disney's least offensive offerings, it ended up ticking me off more than almost any other movie this year. Now, I have a full spoiler review on my channel, so be sure to check that out if you want to see what exactly, kinda irritated me. My next two may be more controversial placements. Up first is 28 Days Later, a film that, with exception to all the roaming hordes of zombies, feels almost like a completely different franchise. Those looking for the same style as the first two films will find a much more somber movie that takes its time. A story about the acceptance of death in a dead world. Though a lot of people will hate it for that, I actually found this is where the film is at its strongest. It has very competent visual language to bring it all home in the final act. All the actors do a great job, especially the main three, including Jodie Comer as a mentally handicapped mother, a surprisingly nuanced performance from Aaron Taylor Johnson as the father figure, and a great breakout role for young actor Alfie Williams. Danny Boyle, he's interested not in just recreating his old world, but also in creating something new. You have this rich world building with this civilization left to fend for itself and relying on the tides for both safety and isolation. You have new emerging cultures and rituals with a travel to the mainland almost as this rite of passage for children as they come of age. It's this world in stasis that's adapting to a new reality. But there's plenty to dislike here too. That disconnect from the rest of the franchise can make it feel like a new idea that's just trying to ride it out on an established name. Basic continuity between films is ignored or hand-waved away. For example, 28 Weeks Later ended with a zombie outbreak in Paris. One sentence is all they need to resolve that little problem. And then there's the issue that the zombies are supposed to all die out after a couple months. But here, we see the zombies able to wander and sustain themselves on animals and worms, basically forever, creating a massive issue with the very central concept of the second movie. Now, you could argue this is all in service of new ideas, but not all of Danny Boyle's new ideas are exactly winners. The naked steroid zombies are frankly just kinda stupid and feel more like bosses out of video games. Even the explanation for how they're possible is something that takes a lot of suspension of disbelief. Even worse, our protagonists keep incapacitating these super zombies only to then just let them live for really no good reason. So even though I was fairly split on this movie in a lot of ways, the reason it ends up here in the fail category is the movie commits what I consider to be one of film's biggest sins: a bad and unsatisfying ending. Near the conclusion, the film looks to be setting up a final resolution between our protagonist and the steroid zombie who's been stalking him, an expectation he will finally have to use his wits and everything he's learned to win the day. But nope, I'm not gonna spoil it, but what they decide to do instead is so wild, it feels like you jumped out of this film and into an Edgar Wright parody.
Okay, John, it's time at the bar.
For me, endings are very important. They are the last impression a story leaves on you. And I left 28 Days Later saying, huh? And the final film in the fail category, I realize I'll probably be in the minority on. I'm perfectly happy when people find enjoyment out of movies that I don't. And horror has always been a genre that I'm extremely picky on. Tell you right now, I'm certainly in the Siskel and Ebert camp that most slashers are kind of just dead teenager movies. They are films where the protagonists are kind of intentionally designed to be dislikable so you can cheer when the masked madman disembowels them in new and creative ways. To me, there's always been just limited entertainment to be found in that. The Final Destination franchise really falls into this category. Except instead of a masked killer with a hook for a hand, you have death itself setting up elaborate Wile E. Coyote death traps. This is admittedly where the film is strongest. There is a real suspense in trying to figure out how the falling dominoes will end with some teenager's brain splattered all over some wall. Though I do say, I don't think they ever topped the creative opening sequence. The gore and the kills, that's not what bothers me. Honestly, that's probably where the fun is. What bothers me is I have to spend time with these intentionally thin, sometimes outright unlikable characters. It's not the deaths, it's the filler in between that's so unsatisfying. You know, the plot. I don't care if any of these people live or die, because I know most won't, just by way of the genre, and I'm not really invested in what kind of BS they have to do to prevent it, especially in this franchise, where it's a given that it's all gonna be in vain, unless it really breaks the mold of the franchise. So then, we have a movie with story beats without any real teeth. It's only interesting in those moments of wondering what object in the room is going to randomly come out and puncture their skulls. Though I do think fans of the franchise, or slashers in general, will get exactly what they want out of this movie. I just think I may be the type of person who would rather cheer for our protagonists to escape our killer rather than root for their brutal deaths. And that wraps it up for fails, but I am gonna throw in an extra little bonus in here from Q1. I didn't catch Wolfman in theaters, but it is now out for rental. I was intrigued by this movie as I liked director Leigh Whannell's breakout film, Upgrade, and how he reinvented the Invisible Man as this Black Mirror-esque tech horror. Unfortunately, Whannell could not replicate his success with Wolfman. In this, he tries to reinvent the character as more of a physically grounded virus, and also as an unsubtle metaphor back to inherited trauma. It has good bones with a strong cast led by Ozark's Julia Garner. But what is missing here is the fantastical. Invisible Man was more grounded in technology, but it still felt outlandish and still kind of true to the source. The Wolfman never even lets its monster look like a wolf, more like a rabid homeless man who maybe needs to see a dentist and hasn't gotten a haircut in a couple days. Even the transformation body horror that really just wants to make you squirm lacks payoff when the final form doesn't all come together. It makes you really just sit there and go, why did I put myself through the suffering of watching people's nails fall out of their fingers? Worse yet though, the film relies on tried and true horror tropes, such as a family stuck in a cabin with no service as a monster is trying to get in. Okay, try and count on your fingers how many of those movies you've seen. You'll run out of fingers real quick. It's not like it's always a bad thing to have genre tropes. It's why people seek them out to begin with. But a locked room, cabin in the woods horror needs something more than someone banging on the door or a claw occasionally coming through a window. Been there and done that. With that, we're wrapping up the losers and moving on to the pass category. Congrats, you made the grade.
You win some, you lose some. But you live. You live to fight another day.
The first one here is one I was a little split on. But I gave it the green light because it had a great central performance that really tipped it over the edge. Bring Her Back is a horror film that wants to be in the vein of Ari Aster's Hereditary and Midsommar. It never quite achieves the same unnerving atmosphere, but it manages to avoid most of the horror tropes that annoy me. Keyword here is most. There are still quite a few horror mainstays here. You got a demonic child who's painted white with spooky eye contacts. At least they restrain themselves and his head never spins around and he doesn't crawl on any ceilings. The film unfortunately relies on people acting like complete idiots, so the plot is even possible. Within this story is a brother looking after his blind sister and trying to get through the foster care system just long enough to become her guardian. His caretakers seem to have their doubts about him, and frankly, so do I, especially given that he sees and learns some pretty messed up stuff at their new home. And instead of just telling his blind sister and, communicating what's happening, he instead chooses to use vague words and then runs out of the house, leaving her in the hands of someone he knows is a murderous madwoman. Yeah, it's another horror where our protagonists kind of have to be idiots for the story to happen. But they're not the only stupid ones. Everyone is. In one scene, he goes to the police and tells them he knows the location of a missing child. Instead of sending, officers to verify his claim, they instead send one overweight social worker to investigate. She goes to the door and asks the murderous sociopath, hey, did you happen to kidnap a child? And when she says no, she basically goes like, okay, all right, well, that sounds good. Yeah, with a missing kid in question, there 100% should have been officers at that door. Yet despite leaning on some tropes that annoy me, like everyone kind of having to be stupid for the movie to work, I will say the film really does have one thing going for it. It's not focused on gore or jump scares or demons grinning from the shadows. Instead, it's really trying to take its time to create this eerie atmosphere. Most of their success comes from just a killer performance by Sally Hawkins. She is convincing in her moments of sweetness, which makes her psychotic breaks and gaslighting all the more unnerving. Hawkins is going to need some Tylenol for carrying this movie on her back, okay? This really was one of the best performances so far this year, and I think it does make the whole package worth watching. But let's jump to a movie that's almost exactly like Bring Her Back, Paddington in Peru. I'm not sure if this is technically Q1 or even 2024. I'm not really sure where it's supposed to land, but who cares? Long story short, if you like stories about posh bears defeating villains with manners, well, I've got some good news for you. I found this sequel just as kind of charming as the first two. Maybe not gut-busting funny, but a soft sort of charming that you can put on with your kids and the whole family can enjoy. And that's it. Sometimes that's all you're looking for. It does its job. What can I say? Mission Impossible also delivered another entry, and it knew what the people wanted. Tom Cruise chopping the wind like it somehow offended him, the stunt team trying to kill him in maybe his maddest stunt yet, and it was packed with outlandish
dare I say it, impossible sequences that you can find in no other franchise. Probably because you wouldn't take those sequences seriously anywhere else. Cruise continues to be the fulcrum that's lifting this franchise out of the generic spy film waters. Though this one may be way too bloated, relies just heavily on nostalgia, and the entity continues to feel like just science fiction, it offsets all this with some of the best film stunts ever brought to screen. Killer cast chemistry, and just a claustrophobic underwater scene that had me gripping the edge of my seat. It may not be top of the franchise, but it is another strong showing that Mission Impossible is a franchise willing to take risks. Though some of those risks do include trying to kill their 60-year-old star. If Tom Cruise is gonna die for you, okay, the least you can do is buy a ticket for him. Marvel also had a franchise release in Q2, a film that really recaptures some of the old Marvel magic. But no good deed goes unpunished, and the film may not even break even. Thunderbolts recaptured the dysfunctional team dynamic that people have loved about the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, except here the heroes have no misgivings about what they are. They're a bunch of contract killers and assassins. Marvel has a new star in Florence Pugh's Yelena, as she can balance the heavy emotional moments with the goofball comedy and an absurd Russian accent that somehow you can take seriously in the more emotional scenes while still being admittedly ridiculous. As for the rest of the cast, with exception to Red Guardian's delusions of grandeur, most of our protagonists see themselves as irredeemable. This only plays into strong themes of mental health, as the main villain is quite literally depression. It is a movie that sometimes can be lacking in classic punch-ups, but it delivers on heartfelt story and likable character bickering matches. So while the action's soft and often unsatisfying, I'll take the weaker choreography for better characters and a story that's worth caring about. But enough of that big budget nonsense, huh? That's probably what you're all thinking here. This is called Journey Through Cinema. So let's get into some real art. Wes Anderson dropped his latest symmetrical pop-up book with the Phoenician scheme. I heard a lot before seeing this movie how Wes Anderson had started playing it too safe and wasn't taking risks. And yeah, this movie's very much his normal bread and butter. It's visually indistinct from something like Grand Budapest Hotel. Yet, I think in the overly familiar, people have forgotten how much effort this style takes. It's got brilliantly unique production design and cinematography that requires hours just to level the tripod. Despite all the familiar elements, the script feels as fresh as ever, more episodic but with intentionality. It's a disjointed series of meetings that builds to a singular goal. Behind it all is Del Toro's great character who grounds the movie, and has one of my favorite performances of the entire year so far. It's a protagonist whose goals we don't fully understand. Any good intentions he has are always undercut by just a hint of calculated villainy. He keeps you guessing. I won't jump up and call it a masterpiece by any stretch. It is safe, but it has a welcoming familiarity. Risk is nice, but it can be overrated. I don't really care how risky a creator is if they are consistently delivering a good piece of art. No one looks at a Picasso painting and went, "Oh no, not this style again, Picasso. Why don't you mix it up?" Granted, I have used art metaphors before, and then art people always come back to me and they say that is not accurate for the artist. I'm sure Picasso had many styles, so feel free to tell me how incorrect I am in the comments down below. And leave a like and subscribe while you're at it. You may as well. You're down there. You're putting in the work.
What you currently have in your mouth is art!
The last of the past category is a film that actually kind of shocked me. This was a movie that I was dreading in much the same way I dreaded all the Disney live-action remakes. And this film has a lot in common with what I hate about the Disney live-action trend. Namely, a feeling of pointless recreation that devalues animation compared to live action, but it's more complicated than that. Again, I have a full spoiler video review on this channel. Feel free to go find it. I was shocked at how much I thought this new How to Train Your Dragon was just okay. I mean, I'm not gonna say it was some sort of knockout of the park or a fresh reimagining like Jon Favreau's Jungle Book. But How to Train Your Dragon benefits from the return of one of their original directors. This was a story strong enough to survive a recreation. Don't get me wrong, the original is still the superior version. But as Hiccup took to the skies, I got back into the story again and ended up enjoying this second ride, regardless of how just overly faithful it was. As I said in my review, most Disney live-action films are the same film, but worse. It was refreshing then to get the same film, but the same. I'm gonna call that a win. And with that, we're now moving into my recommended. First on my list is Friendship, and this is a film that will 100% divide the audiences. If you're already a fan of Tim Robinson's brand of awkward comedy, you are going to have a field day. I saw this at a specialty screening in my town, and I think it was like 90% college kids. all of which were very likely I Think You Should Leave fans. Because they were so into it, it made for a terrific viewing experience, and one of the funniest screenings that I've been to all year. Just be warned that Tim Robinson thrives on the silent in-betweens, the social awkwardness that makes people cringe and uncomfortable. In this film, he lampoons the male loneliness epidemic, creating a character so desperate for platonic male friendship that he's willing to throw away his beautiful life with a beautiful wife and a child, all right? Just throw it all down the paper shredder. It's a movie just full of chaos, driven by a protagonist's feelings of inadequacy and a desperation to fit in, alongside pretty much making every bad choice he possibly could make. It's a character-driven comedy that never would have worked without Robinson in the role. For me, sometimes it's the right experience at the right time. It was a great screening with a great crowd, and overall, just the movie experience that I'd been waiting for a while. Second on the list is probably the dad movie of the year. Much like how Ford v Ferrari and Top Gun Maverick got every dad off their couch and back into the cinema, so too does F1, a movie where director Joseph Kosinski kinda plagiarizes his own film to satisfying results. This is not a script powerhouse by any stretch. It is the old dog underdog story template lifted straight out of Maverick and applied to the world of Formula One racing. But let's be completely honest here. You are not here for the story anyways. You are here for either the easygoing charm of Brad Pitt or the high-octane G-forces and asphalt-ripping races. And oh boy does this film deliver. The film took a lot of practical lessons from Maverick's VFX. It knows when to make it, and it knows when to fake it. So much of this is practical, and the stuff that isn't, it's gonna be pretty hard to separate. Cameras mounted to fast-moving cars that are going hundreds of miles per hour and passing one another with inches to spare. If that doesn't get your heart pumping, Pitt's smolder and natural charm will, as he kind of just eats a bunch of snacks as he acts his way across the screen, as usual. This is a film built for the big screens. If it's already raced past you, do yourself a favor and, I don't know, buy a projector screen or something. This is what the big screens were made for. And now that we've had our fun, let's jump over to the more depressing end of the spectrum. Warfare is not a weapons-blazing, flag-waving action extravaganza, as much as the trailers sometimes tried to paint it as such. This is a harrowing film, a movie co-directed by cinematic auteur Alex Garland and from the lived experience of military veteran Ray Mendoza. They are two sides making up one coin. Garland brings in his cinematic experience, creating tense military set pieces in the vein of Civil War, but combining it with the authentic perspective of a soldier who survived the events. It is a match made in heaven. I have rarely seen a movie that made me sit in tense suspense, cover my eyes, and grieve all at the same time. Every shot sounded through the theater like death itself. Much like Civil War, full props goes to the sound design. But this time, the true terror, it comes from the screams of the wounded that feel like they just sort of stretch for hours. This is not a war film. I think this is more a slice of life film that happens to take place in a war. A terrible slice of life as we watch a mission spiral out of control, with scared soldiers trying to find an escape and dust settling with this grim feeling of pointlessness. This movie left me gutted by the end, and I'm not sure I've ever seen a better combination of lived experience combined with cinematic certainty from two directors. Find it and get yourself some good speakers. And the last on the list is, drumroll, you already know what it is, Sinners. This was a surprise that brought me back to the good old times of blockbusters. This felt like the sort of movie someone like Steven Spielberg would have made back in the 80s. A B-movie idea with A-movie execution. A group that's trapped in a small space and trying to fend off vampires, yeah, that's not exactly revolutionary. It's not some bold new idea. Most directors probably would have phoned it in. Ryan Coogler didn't have to get me to care about the characters so much. He didn't have to spend over half the runtime setting up this community. He didn't have to create a timely metaphor for cultural assimilation. He didn't have to put in a killer soundtrack. But he did. Just because you are aiming for simple entertainment doesn't mean the entertainment needs to be simple. This is a simplistic script, but is elevated completely by the man behind the camera, who injects it with so much personality. It has something to say, but it's not pretentious about it. It's letting the message easily rest there between Michael B. Jordan's crooked grins, some Irish jigs, and just a whole lot of blood. This is the kind of summer movie I miss. Mid-budget films that are loose enough that they're willing to take risks and let the director cut loose and make something that just takes you for a ride. Sinners does that while never feeling disposable. You'll see it once, and in 10 years, you'll remember half the film. Now that is entertainment. And that's all I have for quarter two. Sorry for the late release, but I promise it could not be helped. Once again, if you enjoyed this sort of content, let me know and like and subscribe, and I'll keep doing them. This is a good way to get more of my thoughts out on films that I maybe don't have time to do full video essays on. Most of my mainstays, you all seem to be the ones watching these, and I can't tell you how much it means to have you with me on this journey. As always, please keep those reels turning. Thank you.